Welcome to the next episode of our podcast, Indiana is Ag+Bio+Science. It's presented by AgriNovus Indiana and Inside Indiana Business. I'm Gerry Dick, the host of Inside Indiana Business, also the host of this weekly podcast, where we have in-depth conversations with leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs in Indiana's Ag+Bio+Science sector. It's the sector where food, agriculture, science, and technology converge. This week, excited to sit down with Jason Pennington. Jason is the Executive Director at the Indiana IoT Lab. And Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Gerry.
IoT, Internet of Things, it's something we're hearing a lot more about. Give us the lowdown, because really this was the first of its kind in Indiana and one of the first of its kind, I think, in the country, right?
Yes, sir. We were recognized in August of 2018, really by an International Economic Development Commission as being one of the first of its kind. Really a true public-private partnership, and it's been a really interesting take on for the city as well as the tenants and members that have been on board with us.
Describe the Indiana IoT Lab. You can almost see it here from Launch Fishers, part of this innovation culture, if you will, in Fishers. Who's there? What takes place there?
We spun out of Launch Fishers, so a little bit the brainchild of what was the traditional co-working space, and really a team of stakeholders that came together, and ultimately we built a lab that's designed for those tech-oriented companies, perhaps hardware-first companies that perhaps don't belong really in a traditional office environment. So our building is much more boots on the ground, machines, probably a strong likelihood that there's going to be a small fire in there at some point of the day with a laser or whatever piece of equipment that we have. Our companies, generally speaking, need machines. They're prototyping, putting circuit boards together, and doing a lot of really interesting iterations on hardware for connected technologies.
Talk about IoT and why Indiana is uniquely positioned to take advantage of this Internet of Things movement. A lot of people have heard of IoT, but still have no idea what it's all about.
We are uniquely positioned, I think, with respect to connected technologies, and it's very embracing of lots of pillars underneath that term. Our heritage just as a manufacturing state, number one in GDP manufacturing, I believe, top 5 in agriculture, really a top state in terms of distribution, logistics. Internet of Things and what that encompasses has really a potential to disrupt all of these industries that are so vital to our economy. So, it goes much more beyond the simple convenience of having a connected speaker or a smart light bulb in our home. These are really world-changing technologies that have a dramatic impact, not only today, but moving out into the future.
As you look at the space, there are 25,000 square feet approximately in the Indiana IoT Lab. How many companies are represented there? And give us a description of the types of companies that are there.
As you say, we're about 25,000 square feet. We have approximately 20 companies in-house right now, and this ranges from a one-person Bluetooth studio, really a world-class Bluetooth company based out of the IoT Lab that literally is consulting worldwide at a high-level standards board even for the Bluetooth Foundation. That ranges all the way to the other end of the spectrum where we have an outpost of Roche Diagnostics there, so really a global scale, diabetes managed care company doing iterative work in the lab. And then a lot of local companies. Those local companies range from startups that are now growing and scaling to essentially outposts of very established firms like Flexware Innovation as an example. So here's an Indiana company, 80 people, fantastic leadership. They have a 6-person R&D team within the lab, really commissioning hardware-oriented projects to solve real-world problems for their customers.
Earlier this year, you included AgriNovus in your comprehensive report, The State of IoT, which really focused on the core economic pillars in the state, manufacturing, logistics, ag among them. Tell us a little bit more about the report and the outcomes that you have found in sharing the story of the IoT Lab.
Yeah, so it's really hard to describe that publication. Started out really as a publication and just morphed into a project, and it speaks a lot to just the ecosystem here in Indiana. I couldn't imagine that really anyone we asked to participate actually said no, and that publication really took a life onto its own. And as you mentioned, we really started out with a framework of make things, move things, grow things, kind of speaking to that manufacturing, ag, distribution. As we went through and really developed the story further, further, we included a lot of the just baseline technologies surrounding Internet of Things. And I'll say we really didn't even know how to release a publication, so we combined that with our 1-year anniversary. So a few hundred people in the building, just a great night, a great atmosphere with all of our contributing editors and submitters of information. Through the life of that publication now, we know that there have been several thousand electronic downloads, nearly 1,000 printed copies out in distribution, and in all, I know that it's been hit in well over 10 countries. Wow. So just from an exposure point of view, I think the outcomes are great to be able to tell Indiana's story, specifically that connected tech story. Right now, I think we're really excited framing the outline, if you will, for the 2020 edition, and just curious to see where that's going to go this year as we really make some commentary on what it really are the themes emerging in this connected tech space today.
Do you think that the IoT Lab is helping to position Indiana more favorably in the IoT marketplace? Everybody's kind of chasing that, involved in that in some way or the other. But do you think the IoT Lab is, giving that vibe, that perception of Indiana that's more positive?
Oh, it's not just us. There are groups like AgriNovus, Connexus, for example, now another CICP entity with an Industry 4.0 strategy, with a few of our new tenant companies working in the medtech space, even the BioCrossroads people, now involved really to kind of amplify this story of Indiana altogether. And I think that's one aspect that makes us really uniquely positioned as a state. If we consider what's happening in the universities as well as the public-private partnerships and just some of the real innovative companies we have here in the state, together it's a great story to tell.
We've had Zach James, the founder of Rabbit Tractors, on this podcast. He's an Indiana Ag+Bio+Science entrepreneur using IoT in his small, what he calls swarm-enabled tractors. Really kind of a fascinating model. The IoT Lab does what it does on a daily basis with companies, but also hosts all kinds of events and venues. Rabbit Tractors and Beck's Hybrids were part of your inaugural Indiana Festival of Autonomy. That was in August with the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. Tell us about the event and how you continue to use events like that to showcase the intersection of technology and ag.
We have a really great local innovator named Aaron Pierce. Aaron is Pierce Aerospace, so doing some really interesting, fascinating work in the drone, unmanned airspace. And he and another gentleman, Gerry Bullock, who is a former Crane, very high-level subject matter expert, respected in the industry, they essentially operate a UVSI Indiana's chapter. And they just simply asked if we could have our third quarter regional meeting at the IoT Lab. And the more we understood what that meeting was all about, what they wanted it to be, I thought, there's no way, we're going to let this come into our town and just be a meeting. What can we do? So out of that, this Indiana Festival of Autonomy was born. And autonomy, much more of a concept, a construct, really, versus just a pure technology. Out of that, we had breakout sessions, panels, really talking to the extent of mobility. So companies like Braun Ability, for example, Cummins, IUPUI, we really had a great panel built around just mobility as a concept. It was also a great opportunity to showcase this technology with our immediate community. So we can, think about that in terms of all this autonomous robotics, self-driving cars, all of these things. Is it good or bad? Our position is it's going to happen anyway. So we need to lead the change. And, if I can have the community show up and have, the elementary, middle school kids, seeing professionals do what they do and then create a very approachable, hands-on opportunity for a student to fly a drone and inspire them, I think that's how we win, right, long-term, is that this vision of the community is measured in decades. It's not one event, but this happened to just be a great event. As you talk about the idea of planning a festival, once we landed on the concept of a robotic petting zoo, we all knew, this was going to be great if we just put our energy into showcasing, what it could be.
In addition to bringing conferences and events to Indiana, there's also an importance that you place on attending high-profile events. I know you recently attended the TechCrunch Disrupt event in San Francisco with Generator, AgriNovus, and the Indiana Startup Delegation as well there. What's the importance of going to events like that? What do you gain by showcasing Indiana in places like Silicon Valley? Valley?
Really the birthplace of it all. And I think just the way that question leads up speaks to the importance of it is, as a state, how we present ourselves speaks volumes to some of the other communities that you have out there. So, having Generator, AgriNovus, IoT Lab, Launch Fishers, IEDC personnel all traveling together really speaks to, the strength of us as an ecosystem, as a community. At the same time, really going to this ubiquitous, synonymous almost with tech, it really provides an opportunity to benchmark. I don't know that we want to be Silicon Valley, but we want to be a better Indiana. In the scheme of that, we can certainly benchmark ourselves and see that there's a lot of things we're doing really well, and there's also some opportunities to see that perhaps there's something we could do a little better, maybe a little differently, but at the same time have our own kind of Indiana swagger to it, if you will.
The IoT Lab is about a year and a half old since the grand opening, and that was a great event to kind of kick things off. What's next for the Indiana IoT Lab?
Yeah, so what's next for us? Well, that's something we ask ourselves every day. We've recently had some companies, exit the IoT Lab in a very positive way through growth and acquisition. That's a really good thing. I think we've said a long time ago, if we're doing all the things we should be doing well, we have no forever tenants at the IoT Lab, really to perpetuate this startup, scale up, grow out. I think really the next phase for us is focusing on the smaller, the startups, the true startups, and in a sense, kind of extending our opportunities to help them grow their business. That's everything from business coaching to customer validation, aligning with fundraising.
Well, that's lots of excitement continues at the Indiana IoT Lab. Jason Pennington is the executive director at the lab. Jason, thanks very much for taking time to come across the parking lot from the IoT Lab here to Launch Fishers for the podcast. Great to see you.
Thank you very much, Gerry.
And thank you all for joining us on this edition of the Ag+Bio+Science podcast. It is a weekly production partnership between AgriNovus Indiana and Inside Indiana Business. And before we sign off this week, AgriNovus has opened up registration for its 2019 Agbioscience Innovation Summit. To learn more and to register for the November 20th Agbioscience Innovation Summit, all you have to do is visit agrinovusindiana.com/summit. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm Gerry Dick. We'll see you next time.
This podcast is a product of Inside Indiana Business, hosted by Gerry Dick, produced by Libby Fritz and Joe Ullery, and was recorded on location at Launch Fishers. More people get Indiana business news from Inside Indiana Business than any other source.